Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today is Friday, the 7th of July, 2017. And again, we have Clif High, who is joining us for this exclusive interview. And we're going to be going over a lot of crypto information and some exclusive and brand new information regarding the Populous PPT token, which is going live on the exchanges on the 9th of July, this Sunday. So welcome back to the channel, Clif.
Thank you very much.
As I said, we're going to be going into this populist sector, and I just want to first off mention that the reason this came to my attention is it was picked up through one of your reports. Now, the data that was actually found through your webbot sourcing highlighted it as a train, as it were. So that's obviously brought it to a lot of people's attention. However, when it actually was in its pre-ICO phase, it kind of slipped underneath the radar a little bit, because during that time frame, we just came out of the ICO boom, which was the status ICO, which you also mentioned about. We also had the 10x ICO, and this one kind of just slipped under, which a lot of people have only just sort of picked up on and are trying to find out a bit more information about it, because obviously this is going to be a huge entry into the crypto space. So Clif, first of all, do you have any relevant updates your side regarding the PPT token?
Not necessarily new data per se, but just to explain how I came across it there. It's an issue of the space that it occupies. The cryptos are all not trying to crowd into the same market or retail area. There's many different areas that are now being approached with funding via ICOs. And Populous came up because it's business model, if you will, and actually it came up because of the geographic references. I kept getting lots of geographic references to just an odd set of occurrences, which was North Africa, Middle East, and Asia as a secondary spot. And then I drilled down into it and I was like, this is what's going on here. The data is forecasting that the let's say the payment space or government interaction payment space, however it's going to be defined linguistically, is going to be probably dominated by a company out of this region. And I started looking into what the data was showing me and got clues as to the pop of Populous. And of course, Populous as a word is very key for us and was very easily used to identify the space as a whole. The interesting thing about Populous really is that the area it occupies, its defined marketing space, has yet to have any other significant movers in it. And so to a certain extent, it's very much like Veritasium, that Populous may actually have a chance to be the super dominant player. And just because of first mover advantage, and then the fact that they're not screwing around. These guys are really serious about what they're doing.
So when you refer to them as being a dominant force, is that just in their niche market or as a token in the entire crypto space?
One equals the other. So if you dominate your niche market, by very definition, your head is up above the rest of the field, so to speak, and so you're easily seen. So it's very much a situation of Google dominates search engines, but they're ever so much more than that, simply because they were able to dominate search engines. Make sense?
Sure, yeah, because the way I'm seeing things, obviously Veritasium is massive, and it's got a huge market cap that it can actually penetrate into, which I thought was of a higher volume than potentially Populous can break into. But you're saying that that might not be the case.
I'm saying definitively that is not the case.
There you go.
That is, insofar as I can tell. Okay, so if we were to look, say, 2 or 3 years out, Veritasium has a limited market. It's a huge, giant, dynamic market, but it's really narrowly focused. Populous, on the other hand, is a much more broad train. It goes to a lot of different areas, and it's capable of doing different kinds of business that Veritasium is simply not focusing on. Veritasium is a really good solid engine. It knows where it's going. It's very specifically focused and so on. Populous is also specifically focused, well engineered, and that kind of thing. But its potential number of tracks it can run on is just so much larger because it's not limiting itself to that small Wall Street market, if you will. It's actually out doing real work in real government quarters, getting contracts to, provide this platform for payment processing, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so I think I should probably make it aware to the audience right now that those who follow me are fully aware that I'm heavily inside of the Populous community, having done an awful lot of research and obviously the videos that I'm now creating inside of it. Because like Cliff is saying, I actually also see something spectacular happening within inside of that space. Now, I've been in talks with the team directly and they have willingly allowed me to kind of become their speaker through YouTube, which I think is going to be very beneficial for them and ourselves, getting first-hand information directly from the team. Now, as of this morning, prior to Cliff coming on, the Populous team actually handed me over an official document regarding what they have decided to call the secret sauce, which is actually the secret function of how the PPT token can be utilized inside of the Populous platform. So I'd like to share that with you if I can, Cliff, and get
Sure.
your views and opinions. Now, it's quite long, so there is a section at the bottom which is descriptions and more technical side, but I'll leave that out and I will actually include that later on in the interview after Cliff is gone, in order just to save his time, because we are actually hard pressed for time, but hopefully Cliff will come back later on to reanalyze this with us. So let me get straight into this and try and make as much sense of this as you can, Cliff.
Sure.
So this is the official statement from Populous on the 7th of July 2017, titled Behold the Secret Sauce. As we draw closer to the release of PPT, we have decided to release some important features and functions around PPT. Our secret sauce is a term coined by the Populous community. We are releasing this information to avoid confusion from our PPT holders should they unknowingly sell their PPT for initial gains upon our token release on the 9th of July without being fully aware of the true benefits of holding PPT. So what is the secret sauce? Simply, the secret sauce lies within the Populous collateral smart contract and PPT itself. By saying this, we mean that PPT can be used to purchase invoices on a platform while PPT holders maintain ownership of their PPT holdings. This effectively allows PPT holders to receive tokens every 30, 90, and 120 days from their PPT holdings. In other words, this is staked against the invoices. This means the invoice contracts are to be settled by sellers on those timelines at 12 a.m. midnight at the latest. So your PPT will be locked for those durations.
It's an interesting approach, because it provides stability on the platform. It provides the business stability that you need in the internet world by locking things up in the smart contract. The appropriate payment for the restriction on your ability to move the tokens is just the perfect approach to this. Yet another reason that Populous is going to do very well indeed. And see, the basic thing is not factoring. Okay, it's not like you're buying an invoice from a tire shop that may or may not get to collect it all and may have issues with the payment. The way Populous is going about it, much of their work is related to government taxation and standard flow through, if you will. So what they're doing is disintermediating all of the other middle players in the sequence of getting money to and from governments in terms of payments and so forth, providing a very much more efficient platform. And because of the way they're doing it within the margin of that, let me just put it this way, in a standard business, you might have, say, 10% of all factored invoices that go bad that are belly up, which is a big chunk. And so they put in all kinds of profit to cover that. In this instance, what Populous is doing is reducing the costs everywhere, which lowers the number of these contracts that'll go bad initially, but also by tying it up there for the 30, 60, 90-day approach. They're providing stability for the invoices on that. It's going to be a very successful approach to doing this, and it also means that they're basically banking on it is a form of savings, if you will, a saving account kind of a thing, in the sense that those funds are tied up on their blockchain for that period of time with a known return. And I can see how they could easily get 6 or 7% of all the invoices go bad, and it wouldn't impact their math at all.
That's right. And they've also got some more information at the end regarding what happens to the ones that do go bad. So how valuable will this make PPT? There are currently less than 1,100 unique account holders of PPT. Our data analysts show that most of our PPT holders are willing to go long on PPT. By revealing the characteristics about the PPT at this stage, and they're referring to the aggressive buyback and burn, which I've outlaid in other videos, we only expect PPT to become much rarer than it currently is, effectively pushing up demand for PPT in the long-term future. We also expect demand for PPT to rise further from institutional investors once the Populous platform goes into alpha and interest.
And I would buy that. That was the big thing in the data sets, was that you would have institutions involved with these guys, unlike a lot of the other coins where you may have hedge funds that come on in and simply buy the token as a potential profits, in selling it later. The Populous stuff, the Populous business model, especially relative to institutions, was such that it showed up as being, in linguistics, it's equivalent to, say, the 1950s and buying AT&T stock in the United States for the dividends. You're going to get something that's going to produce year after year after year after year at a known rate. It's going to be extremely attractive to those companies that are attempting to offer pensions and that kind of, and insurance and so on, where they're simply not getting yield. And so the data within the initial section that pointed me at Populous was all about institutions seeking yield and why, and they would be going after Populous. And so this made me think, if they're going to be, if it's going to be a stampede of elephants at this, maybe a few of us mice should nip in ahead of that and get a few of these guys. And that's why I brought it up.
Okay, and they go on to talk about, for official reasons, we cannot release the full inner workings of our algorithm at this present moment, but we can say we look at the daily pricing of PPT and the daily circulation of PPT.
The active management is another issue. There's basically two approaches to coins, and that is to have a finite amount, as in Bitcoin, which actually, if you think about it, it's going to whittle down over time. Eventually, they'll almost all be lost. But the other approach is to have frothy or potentially unlimited coins and then do a management on them. So Populous is a hybrid approach. They've got a definitive number and then an aggressive burn pattern to reduce the amount of management that they're going to have to put into their funding part of their platform. These guys just made so much sense all along. A solid white paper, really good thinking. It's one of the very few that I see that I'm really impressed with.
And it's not obviously just the invoice factoring sector, is it? Because they've got so many other sectors that they can break into.
Correct. And I actually happen to know that there are rumors I've heard from the other side that the Populous team is in talks with some extremely large players. And I'm not going to mention them because it could fall out at any time, but just the fact that at this early stage they may have such a huge success really does argue for the point of holding the tokens, because the payout over the longer haul, the 30, 60, 90, is just trivial relative to what these things will be worth a year and a half from now. That's
right. So they then break it down into a step-by-step process of what exactly they're going to be doing. So the step-by-step process of using the PP tokens to buy invoices. PPT is deposited by the holder to the Populous platform in order to purchase the invoice selected. 120% is determined by an algorithm and may vary subject to the contract terms, but is taken as a full collateral in PPT. This is due to the value, as it might be volatile over the duration of the contract, so is an added security measure.
And see, that was something there. I mean, if you look at the language in the white paper and so on, you can tell that these guys are very serious business people, because they're always in that language. There's never a risk that is unaddressed. There's never a concern that is glossed over. And so when you get that level of care in the construction of their linguistic offerings, you know that mindset behind it is going to keep going that way. And I like the idea that they're deliberately flattening the volatility with their lockup in the smart contract approach. Made so much sense.
So the seller of the invoice will receive a trade-in amount of 80% of this PPT deposit in exchange for their trade. Again, this rate is determined by an algorithm and is subject to change. The fee of 0.15% goes directly to Populous platform for providing the collateral service, exclusive of invoice and fees, which is paid by the invoice seller, not buyer. Here's the exact 6-step stage of what exactly is going to happen for anybody that wants to deposit PPT and go through the whole procedure. So step 1, PPT holders see an invoice he or she wishes to trade. He deposits his PPT into the Pokin GBP collateral contract. Step 3, he is issued with Pokin. Step 4, he trades an invoice in Pokin. Step 5, funds are paid back by invoice seller into Pokin collateral contract. Step 6, the investor receives back his PPT into his Ether wallet and profits in Pokin minus the fees.
It's a really good business model. There's so much of this and it needs to be done, and we're at that point in the breakdown of the old system where there's so much that is not being done, in the sense that the factoring, the invoice markets and everything are dying simply because of the middlemen involved taking out all of the potential for any growth, what with the 0% interest rates in all the central banks. So basically, the central banks have squeezed too tightly on everybody, and it has affected insurance companies, it's affected pension plans, it's affected factoring, because none of these sectors can get any delta. They're all working on such a small margin that there's no room to make profit. There's no room to even make business investments. Everything becomes a hyper risk. And so the cryptocurrencies have arisen just when we need it. And now people are looking out there and saying, well, geez, all these people are desperate for some funding and business here. Let's go out and do it. And Populous is one of the really sharp ones that looked at that aspect of the transaction market, okay? Because if you think about it, you can do this with governments. So you could go and buy an invoice that the Chinese government is willing to sell on tax collections in a particular province, that sort of a thing. So really secure kind of known return funds. So with Populous and a few of these other coins coming out, we'll have an effective retirement industry again. We'll have an effective insurance industry again, because they'll be able to get yield.
So this is going to obviously correct a lot of the rotten apples out there. And
imagine the situation too. Let's divert for a second and go to the idea of super dominance. Okay, we have a situation now where you can examine super dominance in a technical sense and look at it, and it's the difference between Google and any other search engine. Okay, the difference between the two is insurmountable. It does not matter what other search engine you choose. And this happens in all of the technical areas where you have a good solid base from which to go. So we note that Yahoo is not where Google is, even though they had first mover advantage. And so this is the kind of thing that we're looking at here. It's not simply first mover advantage, but if you do have that and you've got the other components that make it a success, then basically you become the dominant force and you'll never ever be taken down insofar as the current paradigm is showing. And I suspect Populous will be the dominant force in this particular niche.
So that's great, because obviously we can see that happening, but then a lot of people are like, hey, that's great, but what can I do to get inside of this? Now, what I will do is later on inside of this interview, I will break this down and read through this all a lot more. But what I just want to quickly hit on, which is exactly what this does for people who are wanting to buy PPT on Sunday, on the 9th, what this effect actually is inside of the platform. Say you have 12,000 pounds worth of PPT tokens. Now you can actually stake those against a contract every single month for a whole year, which they are projecting inside of some figures that I have, which I will lay out for you shortly, effectively a 50% fiat profit on your PPT tokens. So not only do you actually submit your tokens, you will generate 50% fiat income off of that, plus you will get your initial tokens back regardless. So,
and that 50%, by the way, is predicated on existing circumstances. So
exactly.
if we examine the continued degradation of the fiat, in fiat, it might be considerably more than that simply because they've debased it even more.
But that's quite a unique function which hasn't actually been utilized inside of a token as of yet. So that is probably something that is going to be picked up with a lot more other coins and utilize this function inside of a platform. And it also adds, obviously, people will be more reluctant to want to sell when you can effectively create a passive form of income off of your holdings that you currently have inside of PPT currently. Would you agree with this?
Correct.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, certainly. And in fact, it's going to make a lot of people very reluctant to sell. It's going to push the price of the tokens up. It's going to actually make everything so much more difficult for those people that don't have them and want to get them. But the also on the other side of that is, once obtained, because of the way in which the Populous platform is managed, I wouldn't be particularly concerned about super hyper volatility and trying to get involved with that. I would just hold for the long term personally. Now, I don't buy the coins in my reports usually, although on my vacation period here, I'm going to start getting into a few of them. Populous is a really good coin for anybody that needs that long-term investment. I really like these guys. They were really a standout.
Okay, great. Now, one tail end of that is, now the Populous team have actually stated, should anybody forfeit on the contract that you've bought the invoice for, then they will help you actively challenge and get back the capital that is tied to that contract. And that's all through a 3-tier platform of securities that any seller has to put up, which is basically like a guarantee for this. You need to have assets which are obviously liable for forfeiting should you fail to meet the terms on the contract. So there's a lot of positive notes. When you put your PPT up against an invoice, it's pretty secure for making sure that you get them out of the other side of that contract as well, along with hopefully a heap of fiat cash which you can use in obviously your daily life for paying bills and things like that, which will obviously be of massive use for a lot of people. Basically, free living cost.
The way that they did this was they thought about the problem in two ways, okay? Because there's always the issue of the people that are, or organizations proffering the invoices and then the invoices themselves. And so Populous, you'll note in terms of how they did this, they took let's validate both ends of it. So they have an approach that is validation on the seller, a multiple tier approach. So the higher up in the tier, the more secure. It's very much an internal rating system. The way that bonds would be rated by analysts is that kind of thing, right? AAA and so on. Yeah. This is an internal mechanism for that. And then they also deal with the individual invoices on the other side of that as a subset of that. So they've got it really covered. I was just very impressed with the design all the way through.
Okay, Cliff, so do you actually have any price figures that are coming through the data?
I don't have it that way. That's so rare to get numbers. I don't have any this far on Populous. What I do know is that we're looking for some temporal markers that will have Populous forming long-lasting bonds with Chinese officialdom. And as that occurs, that I think is going to be their stair step into that super dominant position.
Yeah, because obviously you tend to get numbers when it's related to Chinese information. Correct. Don't you? So as soon as we start seeing activity out that side, then that's when the figures should start presenting themselves, correct?
It sort of works that way, correct. We get numbers all the time, but there's not necessarily a prescient hook to them, so I discard them because I can't say for sure it's what I think it may be, but I need to have the linguistics around it. So I suspect maybe in a month or so, as Populous as it moves out, so to speak, right, into the reality, then I suspect that we'll start getting those kind of things. It does show relative to its space, there's a lot of the same kind of linguistics around Populous that we had initially around Veritasium. So that's, it was just a real good match for me, and I felt very good about putting it into the report.
Great. Well, anyway, thank you so much for actually putting it into the report. There's going to be a lot of people that are very excited for Sunday the 9th to see what happens. There's a lot of people who are obviously still outside and wanting to buy. So it's going to be obviously an interesting month, I guess, of development inside of price realizations.
It's going to be longer than a month as we go through this chaos and stuff, but this next month is going to be really interesting. I agree.
There's just a lot of people inside the community who just don't know where it's going to start, and obviously it's going to be extremely volatile for at least the first few days, the first week. That's why I said the next month, at least, so it starts to get a bit of a trend and we can see what's happening. But obviously the team themselves aren't actually physically able to get access to over 12 million tokens until 1 year's time anyway. So what does that tell you about the actual team behind it? They see.
Sure, you have to have that escrow. You've got to have that lockup, the vesting period. If you don't have that, these people are just basically allowing themselves to be open to scamming. Yeah. And that's what I really like about all the Populous guys. They're so focused on, eliminating the negatives as they go along, putting a blockage to fraud wherever they could, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, Cliff, thank you so much for your time. I do have some people that submitted some questions and things, so hopefully we can hit those next week some stage if you have a bit of time available. Guys, I'm really sorry that we had a few technical issues today in getting this set up, so apologies if you don't have your questions heard for about another week. Okay.
Yeah, we can do it next week. Shouldn't be too much of a problem then.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks a lot for your time, Cliff, and best of luck with the house.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Talk to you next week.
Cheers. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye, Cliff. So guys, some of you are aware I'm covering a lot of Populous and their PPT token that I've decided to offer my services to the Populous team as an outlet on YouTube to share their updates and information. They have just agreed to forward me not only updates, but also sensitive data to help paint a picture of where this project will be going over time. So my followers will hear first-hand information that can place you ahead of everyone else when it comes to PPT and the Populous platform. You might wonder why I'm doing this. Well, I've spent a lot of time, more than on any other ICO project to date, and the more I find out exactly what this has in store, the more energetic I am to be fully involved in this creation. So before I get started on releasing some of the most explosive news around PPT and the secret sauce, I'd like to remind a lot of people that this find and signal mainly came from Clif High's wealth report. So thank you, Cliff, for finding the gem and bringing it to our attention. And remember, guys, if you don't hold any, you can buy on the 9th of July via one of the exchanges that will support this, and the details for that will be in the description. So let me read the official statement from the Populous team, 7th of July 2017. Behold the secret sauce. As we draw closer to the release of PPT, we have decided to release some important features and functions around PPT. Our secret sauce, which is a term coined by the Populous community. We are releasing this information to avoid confusion from our PPT holders, should they unwillingly and unknowingly sell their PPT for initial gains upon our token release on the 9th of July without being fully aware of the true benefits of holding PPT. So what is the secret sauce? Simply, the secret sauce lies within the Populous collateral smart contract and PPT itself. By saying this, we mean that PPT can be used to purchase invoices on a platform while PPT holders maintain ownership of their PPT holdings. This effectively allows PPT holders to receive tokens every 30, 90, and 120 days from their PPT holdings. This means the invoice contracts are to be settled by sellers on those timelines at 12 AM midnight at the latest. So your PPT will be locked for those durations. So how valuable will this make PPT? There are currently less than 1,100 unique account holders of PPT. Our data analyst shows that most of our PPT holders are willing to go long on PPT. And guys, I'm just going to insert a couple of images here based upon a Twitter poll that I did with results from around about 100 people, which obviously represents close to 1% of account holders. So as I flick through these Twitter polls, you can actually start to see that a lot of the initial investors are not willing to actually sell currently. Not only because it's not actively live on an exchange, but because they understand the business model behind it. And when I get down to the further details about the secret sauce, these numbers are going to change even higher to the hold rate. So I'll carry on. By revealing the characteristics about the PPT at this stage, and he's referring to the aggressive buyback and burn, which obviously I've covered in my initial video, where the main team are going to be using revenue created from the platform in fiat currency to actively purchase back PPT off of exchanges and burn them. In other words, delete them from circulation. We only expect PPT to become much rarer than it currently is, effectively pushing up demand for PPT in the long-term future. We also expect demand for PPT to rise further from institutional investors once the Populous platform goes live into alpha and interest from investors outside the crypto space hear about it. For official reasons, we cannot release the full inner workings of our algorithm at this present moment, but we can say we look at the daily pricing of PPT and the daily circulation of PPT. The next is a step-by-step process on using the PPT tokens to buy invoices. PPT is deposited by the holder to the Populous platform in order to purchase the invoice selected. 120% is determined by the algorithm and may vary subject to contract terms, but is taken as full collateral in PPT tokens. This is due to the value, as it might be volatile over the duration of the contract, so is an added security measure. The seller of the invoice will receive a trade-in amount of 80% of this PPT deposit in exchange for their trade. Again, this rate is determined by the algorithm and is subject to change. There is then a fee of 0.5%, which goes directly to Populous platform for providing the collateral service, and this is exclusive of invoicing fees, which is paid by the invoice seller, not the buyer. So we have a 6-stage step for purchase and redemption of all funds at the end. So step 1, PPT holders see an invoice he or she wishes to trade. Step 2, he deposits his PPT into the Pokin GBP collateral contract, which obviously we know that the platform is using pounds, Great British pounds, as the medium of exchange. However, they will have all other forms of currencies on the platform as well. And this is obviously in the initial video, which is about 1 hour 25 long. So I recommend you seeing that if you haven't done so already. Step 3, he is issued with Pokin GBP. Step 4, he trades an invoice in Pokin GBP. Step 5, funds are paid back by invoice seller into Pokin GBP collateral contract. Step 6, the investor receives back his PPT into his Ether wallet and the profit in Pokin GBP minus the fees. Now, what I'm going to do now, which was different from the Clif High interview, is actually break down a set of scenarios where we can understand it fully. So this will be up on your screen now as well to see with your eyes, because I understand a lot of people, they can hear the words, but it can be very muddling. So you need to actually be able to look at it and read the words yourself and let it sink in. So you may have to pause the screen and go over this a few times to get it. But when you get it, my God, does it show you the explosive potential of every single person out there who is currently holding PPT tokens and everybody who is wanting to get into this on the 9th of July. Because, to be honest, inside of the Slack channel, which is where a lot of the information is exchanged and a lot of the community are talking, there is only around 500 people. Now, there's 1,100 unique holders, which means there are around 500 people who are quite likely not going to be getting this information. So those are the people who are quite likely going to not understand what it is that they hold. And for those of you who currently don't have PPT tokens, those are the people that you're going to be buying from in order to understand this and hold it for a longer term to create some significant and quite likely life-changing sums of wealth. So breaking down the numbers. So for an invoice of, say, £10,000, this is how it works out. PPT buyer has to deposit £12,000 worth of PPT, which is the 120% of invoice total as collateral to purchase outright, of which they receive 10,000 GBP tokens. Any less, and another party will have to join to make up the missing value. If it's another PPT holder that joins the trade, they will need to deposit the remaining value of 120% of the missing total. However, if it's a token holder that joins, they only need to deposit 100%, as tokens are pegged 1-to-1, so only require the missing value to fill the contract. So for an invoice amount worth 10,000 GBP tokens, the investor buys the invoice for, say, 9,500 GBP tokens, which is the sale price. So the initial investment of 9,500 GBP tokens with a £12,000 PPT bond, as it were, the profit will total £405 after deducting financing and platform fees. So if you were to repeat this process 12 times throughout the year on a 30-day contract term, this would actually create 405 times 12, which is 4,860 GBP tokens. Now bear in mind that you've converted your holding of PPT tokens for a 12,000 bond. They've got £2,000 worth of PPT tokens tied up for volatility inside of that token on exchange. They've then issued the 10,000 GBP tokens in order to purchase the invoice. Now, for simplicity in maths, obviously we're not paying 10,000 for the contract. We're paying 9,500. So you're going to have £500 of GBP tokens inside of your balance. But this is obviously just a rough sketch of how the figures work. Obviously, the invoices you're going to be able to purchase for all different types of amounts. Sometimes you might even get them a lot cheaper than this, obviously increasing the profit. But for the basis of trying to explain this without trying to make it too complicated, which I fear it may already be for a lot of people, it just takes a bit of time to go over this several times in order to finally let it sink in, and then it starts to make sense. But effectively, you're converting your £12,000 worth of PPT tokens. You're holding them inside of their platform for the duration of, say, a year. So you are locking those away for a year, but you are also gaining cash flow, positive cash flow in fiat form, which has multiple benefits for, obviously, if you want to use that to pay for bills, or you want to use that for reinvesting into things or buying other cryptocurrencies. This all becomes available through placing your tokens up against invoices for purchase. So we'll carry on. Now, the profit may vary according to fees, etc., but this is using the PPT asset, which might just be stored in a wallet, appreciating over the year anyway. So with this added feature, you can potentially make almost 50% profit a year in additional gains in the PPT value, which is effectively creating passive income for the duration of the platform life. And as long as the 3 security factors of the invoice seller hold up, and if they don't, Populous will do a charge for late payments and recover the debt on the behalf of the investor. So this is almost sounding like it's such a watertight thing to be doing that, short of a global catastrophe and a complete Mad Max environment, this should actually stand the duration of time, as well as the transition that we're seeing inside of the fiat world into this crypto space. And we finish this update with, in the near future, we hope to introduce other ERC20 tokens into our collateral smart contract scheme and expand into other sectors. Stay tuned and enjoy July the 9th, guys. And that is from the Populous team. So that's a hell of a lot of information that people need to absorb in order to make a decision, which is why the Populous team came out stating that we really need to get this information out to you guys, although it's going to probably put the platform back into the copycat scenario with obviously some of the alleged contenders who are stealing data out of the Slack channel, they have deemed it very appropriate to tell everybody this is what the application will be for your token. So if you understand what has just been laid out for you, then come the 9th, you won't sell, which will actually have a massive impact on the demand factor inside of the exchanges. And this, as I've said, is a revolutionary type of token to use this type of setup to create an income off of its token when you don't actually have to sell out of the token. So you're taking near enough no risk in this process. However, you can stake it to generate. That is the secret sauce. And that is going to change the landscape of cryptocurrency.